Hello there. Welcome to Existential Sunday. My name is Corey. If we've not met, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching this later on, in fact, which most of you do, you watch later via replay, please make sure you leave a comment, whether you're watching it on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook. Just comment so I know who was here. I'd love to know who was watching, and you can share your thoughts. You can just say hi. You can just say present, whatever it is you'd like to say. You can do that here. If you are watching Existential Sunday for the first time, this is a space, it's a broadcast that I do every week. And I do it because I believe that it's important that we have a space to wrestle with the things that are happening in real time and hold those things in tension with things that have happened before, that there's a place for us to have discussion and to talk about the stuff that happens at the intersection of culture and faith and politics and justice and all of those things, right? Religion, that we discuss those things, that we talk about the messiness of what some of those things are. And again, if you're watching this for the first time, I just want to make sure I'm explaining to you what's happening before I jump into it. You are likely to hear some things that maybe you've not heard, maybe you've heard before, you disagree with. Maybe some stuff you're like, yes, I'm glad somebody said that, named that thing. And that's just what I hope this space is for all of you. If you've been watching for a while, you're not new to this, you're a regular, you have a seat in this broadcast every single week. Why don't you do this right now? Why don't you hit the share button and share this out on Facebook? You can also share it on YouTube. I don't know. Instagram, I know you can share it on Instagram. I don't know about YouTube. I don't know. But take this moment and share it. Share it with your friends or tag someone in the comments. And also, please make sure that you fill the comments saying hello. I want to make sure I see who's here. So for all of you, welcome. I have a lot on my mind today, so I'm not going to pause to say good morning to everybody. In the that's live. I want to get to what's bouncing around in here, because there's a lot. Like a lot. And there's a lot going on. Excuse me. Obviously, we are 2 days away from an election. But before we even jump into that, I want to lay a little bit of a foundation, and then I'm just going to give you some words for however long I give you words for. But the foundation I want to lay for this particular weekend or this particular broadcast is around this idea that comes from my, I think it comes from my faith tradition, of this idea of sin. And I want to talk about what that means. Some of you have probably heard me talk about this before. What I'm about to say, so if you have, just bear with me. I grew up in a tradition where sin was viewed as it's this thing that you do, right? There's a list of things that people do that they shouldn't do, and this has to do with who you lay down with, putting tattoos on your bodies, what you say, what you drink, what you smoke or don't smoke, words you use or don't use. This was all the list of things that we could do that were called sin. And this was what the entire faith was about, right? Is that you just avoid these things. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do this, because if you don't do this, it's a sin. And this was the consciousness that was sort of ingrained throughout how I grew up in the Christian tradition. And as I've gotten older and done some of my own reading and study and research and all that, I've come to understand sin a little bit differently. And I've come to understand it through the lens of how the ancient Hebrew people talked about sin. And they talked about sin, or they had this idea about sin that was contrasted with this idea of shalom that I've told you about before, peace, word meaning peace, shalom meaning not just like a peace sign, or just obviously not even the absence of war, because there was war, but there was this idea of shalom was about a harmony within the community, a harmony, a connection, a wholeness between human beings and the human beings' relationship to their land, to the water, to the trees, to the air. They actually believed, there's a lot of the ancient people believed in the divinity of nature, that there was a divine spirit to nature. They believed that the ground was sacred, the garden. In fact, one of the reasons for the Hebrew poem being in a garden is that there was just there's a sacredness to gardens. There's a sacredness to life and preserving it and seeing what we could see and smell and touch and feel, that it was all to be enjoyed in this harmonious way. And that their idea was that if that harmony was broken, that brokenness was called sin. That disruption of peace was called sin. It wasn't just isolated to don't do these things. There was a greater sense of it, right? I know that there are individual things that you can do, but those individual things that people did were more about their effect on society, their effect on the community, their effect on the neighbors that are around, their effect on the land and on the animals. This was what they were talking about. This is what they were trying to preserve. And I think part of the reason why we in the United States, especially people in the United States who have been exposed to Western Christianity, why we have such a hard time recognizing what the disruption of shalom looks like, or what sin actually looks like in our country, is that backdrop, that we don't have this mindset of preserving our land, of taking care of animals, of being mindful of people in our community. And so when there is a disruption to shalom that takes place, actual sin that happens, like what happened in West Philadelphia to Walter Wallace Jr., many of us who come out of the Christian tradition cannot view that thing as sin. We view incidents like this, and I'll get into Walter Wallace Jr.'s story in a moment, but we view things like Walter Wallace Jr., and I'm going to keep saying his name, his encounter with the police as unfortunate at best. But in our worst case scenario, the way the United States tends to talk about these issues when it pertains to Black people who encounter the police and police brutality, is that somehow this Black man or woman or person was wrong and got what they deserved. We can't see the disruption. And so I want to go into Walter Wallace Jr.'s story so that you can see the disruption. You can see the break in the community. You can see the break in the harmony. Walter Wallace Jr. was in West Philadelphia having a manic episode. He had some sort of mental health challenge. Now, let me say this, okay? I've never had a manic episode, but I've had panic attacks. In fact, I fought one off about a week ago. And when you are in the middle of a panic attack, some sort of disruption of your thought process, and everything's racing, you can't calm down. When I first had a panic attack, I was on an airplane, and I just wanted to get off. I couldn't get my mind to stop racing. I had no control, and God forbid that it went even deeper, that I lost even more control. I would want the people to care for me, not to harm me. Walter Wallace Jr.'s mother and wife and community were there when the police showed up because he's having a manic episode, and they are begging these police officers not to harm Walter Wallace Jr. Many of you probably already know this story. They're begging them, don't harm him. They are begging them to help preserve the connection. I want you to hear these words again. Walter Wallace Jr.'s mother and his wife. These are connections. We know these connections because we all have mother. Many of us have partner. In Walter Wallace's case, that partner was wife. We understand what those connections are. And they were begging to keep that connection, even though he was having a manic episode. What they were saying is his manic episode is temporarily disrupting our shalom, but we can, as a community, come around with the right resources for mental health. If we had mental health professionals show up and not police, that we could actually restore Walter Wallace Jr. back to this community in a harmonious way. Because obviously, again, mother, wife, there is a relationship, there is a connection, there is something that's been built. There's a community that loved Walter Wallace Jr. Too often, and we're having these when these incidents show up, there are people from outside of the community, outside of West Philadelphia, outside of the Black community, if I could make it plain, who look into those communities and think that there's nothing there but animals. Which is why it's important to me that you hear mother and wife. And why when we talk about Trayvon Martin, that you hear son. When we talk about Tamir Rice, that you hear son. When we talk about Breonna Taylor, that you hear daughter and girlfriend, that there's relationships, there is connection, then that those connections are consistently disrupted and broken by an empire. By an empire that marches the streets shouting law and order. And that law and order is a disruption in these communities. It continues to happen. I was with my brother and someone I really look up to for the work that he does last week, Pastor Michael McBride, who is right now still on a Souls to the Poles Black Church Pack bus tour. I spent a couple of days on the bus with them, and I was like helping to, rally folks to vote and lift them around the spirits of people who were voting and giving out T-shirts and masks. And one day we actually went to a block I believe we're in South Carolina. It was a block party, and this block party was, it was in the hood. The best way I can describe it. And as we're there at this block party, there's just energy, there's music, there's, talk of why we needed to vote, of making sure people were registered to vote. I think there was a representative there. I mean, it was just really, really, really great event. And there were people there who I didn't know, they didn't know me. I'll describe them. There was a young man who had, I say young man, God, I sound so old. Corey, you're not that old. There was a young man there. There was a dude there who he had tattoos on up and down his arm on both sides. He had his pants sort of sagging, skinny jeans, like Lil Wayne skinny jeans, and hair like mine. And he just kept kind of looking at me in a way that I'm not from the neighborhood. So I was kind of like making sure that, as I looked at him and he looked back at me, that there was, no issue here. So, I mean, if I'm being honest with you, this territory, I don't know. And I don't know what people think of me. So maybe there's a little bit of fright there, a little bit of anxiety, if I'm being honest. But I watched something happen to me something happened to me when I saw what happened. Let's say that again. I watched something that changed me. And I'm standing there, and this old woman with a cane starts walking over to our T-shirt table, and she's struggling to get there. Right? She's got a cane and she's walking. And this guy who I felt intimidated by, because I didn't know him, didn't know the neighborhood, didn't know the area, walked up to this woman and he said, "Are you okay, Ma?" I don't think this was his actual mother. I think this was just someone who was a part of the neighborhood. And there was another guy I talked to there who, as I'm talking to him, is talking about the things that he does in the community, things he had done, but had an overwhelming love for his community and for the people in it. And I was reminded again, because I grew up in a neighborhood like this, I was reminded of how different people are who live in the types of communities where the police show up and disrupt harmony, how different those communities are in reality from what they are portrayed to be through media and television. In fact, as one of the guys said to me, he said, this is the first time we've had a block party like this and the police didn't show up. He said, every time we have a block party, the police show up, tell us we're blocking the streets, try to disperse us in our own neighborhoods. They show up and disrupt our shalom. He didn't say shalom, but I'm telling you this, I'm paraphrasing now, that the police would show up and disrupt shalom. Not far from where we were and where I met the bus tour in North Carolina this week, there was another pastor who organized a rally, rallying people to vote, rallying people to register, Black pastor, Black folks at this rally. The police show up with pepper spray and pepper sprayed people in the crowd, including a 5-year-old little child. I need you to see this as sin, right? Because so much of the political conversation, so many people who are faith-based people, are people who claim a sense of spirituality, people who are concerned with morality. So many of them have conversations about who to vote for based on this idea of sin. And their idea of sin is solely based on who people sleep with. None of your business. What women do with their bodies, none of your business. But those two particular things that are not a disruption to the peace of the community become the issues that cause you to say, hey, I realize that we have an emperor who did not start white supremacy, but we have an emperor who has done absolutely nothing to oppose white supremacy. I realize that that is disrupting communities, but I don't live in those communities. And my idea of sin drives me to vote in a way that keeps sin from happening. Meanwhile, I can stare at these disruptions, these complete upheavals of shalom in Black and brown communities. I can stare and watch these things happen over and over again. They don't move me to the place that I'm moved by things that are none of my business. When what should be your business is that there are people walking the planet, walking the land, walking ground, not far from you and your suburban house and your suburban home, your suburban way of living. There are people actually who are living in underneath the oppression of white supremacy and what white supremacy created. And let me just say this, right? How did white supremacy disrupt or break the shalom of the Black community? Underfunded schools, militarized police in these areas. Again, I just from the horse's mouth had a man tell me to my face, the police show up when we're having block parties, 4th of July block parties, barbecues and fireworks, and the police show up to disrupt it. The police that patrol these Black and brown communities treat these Black and brown people like they are the enemy on site. I've experienced this myself in interactions with police where I am the enemy on site. Underfunding the schools, lack of proximity to healthy food, yet plenty of access to liquor and drugs. Black and brown communities, many of you already know this. How did the drugs get into the Black and brown communities? We can get drugs there, but we can't get resources there for mental health. We can get SWAT teams and pepper spray into Black and brown communities, but we cannot get mental health professionals to show up when Walter Wallace Jr. is having a manic episode. We can only get soldiers to show up. You know who uses soldiers in history, who used soldiers to establish law and order? Caesar, who ultimately set the law, who ultimately created the environment, who ultimately created the society where Jesus had to die, because Jesus came into a structure where to oppose the ideas of Caesar meant that you had to be crucified by soldiers to establish law and order. And now today we have this, again, this outcry for law and order, and we have soldiers moving in to establish law and order. Meanwhile, Jesus decided that the best way to restore shalom was not through violence, fear, conquering, but through serving and loving and being compassionate. It was by disrupting the ideas that oppressed people and kept them down, the ideas that made women property. Jesus opposed those ideas. These ideas that that there should be violence to establish law and order. Jesus opposed that by saying, "Blessed are those who make peace." One last story, and then I'll be done with you. Not done with you. That sounded bad. One last story. A couple of weeks ago, here in my own town, there was a rally put on by the Tri-Valley for Black Lives. This was a part of the movement for Black Lives. I was asked to come speak. It was one of the honors of my life to do so. And they had established a sign garden. It's what they called it, a sign garden. And in this garden were signs said Black Lives Matter, stuff like "Stop shooting us." Just these naming things to affirm the value of Black life, where Black life in this country has been devalued. This garden was this sacred space to make a declaration that Black lives matter, that Black and brown people have dignity and should be able to walk the streets and walk around with their heads held high. This was supposed to be a moving garden, sign garden that would move to different areas throughout. I said the Tri-Valley. For those of you who don't know, the Tri-Valley here in the Bay Area, I guess means three valleys. I don't know. But anyway, it's supposed to move around to different towns. Well, shortly before I left for this bus tour with Pastor Michael McBride, I found out that this garden, this sacred garden, had been disrupted by white supremacists who came and pulled the signs up, who put Trump stickers on over the top of Black Lives Matter signs, which I do find slightly interesting, right? That for somehow the statement, the movement for Black lives, is in opposition to the president of the United States. I find that really interesting and really odd. That your response, that your retort to Black Lives Matter is MAGA or Trump 2020. That's the reply. The reply to Black Lives Matter. I need you to let that sink in for a moment, okay? I really do. I need to pause there for a second. And I need you to really take in what I just said, because you've seen this too. That the response from people to Black Lives Matter, to Black Lives Matter, to the idea that there should be peace in Black communities. Black communities should be free of police violence and any other sort of violence, that there should be well-funded schools and healthy food, and the ability to walk down the street without fear of police or anyone else harming them. That idea is opposed by Trump 2020 or MAGA. So I went down, finishing the story. I went down to this garden where a new friend of mine who is running for a seat at a seat on the Board of Education. And I'm talking to her. I'm asking how she's doing. And she starts crying. And she said, I don't know what we've done to make them hate us so much. She said, I don't know why they hate us so much. I don't know why our peace has to always be disrupted. I don't know why our dignity is always such a threat. I don't know why they can't stop shooting us. Folks, in 2 days, if you're not already, we have what is the first step in restoring shalom or bringing shalom, maybe for the first time, to the United States. And I pray and I trust and hope that you who are watching this can hear what I'm saying to you, and that you will be moved. Some of you, I'm going to look right at you. Some of you, I pray, and that is like a Hail Mary for me. I pray that you are able to hear what I've said and think differently about what it means for there to be sin and shalom in our country. Shalom looks like peace, wholeness, goodness. It looks like preserving the planet, being mindful of the generation after next that will need a world to live in. I know I've said a lot, didn't mean to say as much as I did. If you've watched this for 27 minutes, I suppose, especially if you're watching it via replay, I suppose you found something that I said compelling. If you did, throw something in the comments and just let me know that you're here and that something I said resonated with you. Again, if you'd like to share this broadcast, you can. You never have to ask my permission on any of the platforms to share it. This is shareable content. I hope you would. I wish you would. Hope you would. I don't know how to say that. Would share it. I appreciate all of you who are a part of our Patreon community, who continue to support this work and encourage me in so many ways. And I thank you to all of you who watched. I don't know why I thanked you for watching, but still, I did. Thank you for watching. Grace and peace to all of you. Until next time.